If you told me a year ago that I'd be sitting alone, watching the life I'd built collapse in slow motion, I'd have laughed and called you crazy. See, I'm Nick, a pretty average guy. Nothing flashy, but I take care of myself. For most of my 33-year marriage to Sarah, we had it all. Kids, a decent house, and that kind of love that grows deeper with each year. She's my rock, or at least she was. Never thought she'd throw all of it away for a one-night mistake. But life's got a twisted sense of humor. I met Sarah in the 80s at a bar in Maplewood, my hometown. I was working as a bouncer, big guy, friendly enough, but I could get rough when I had to. She walked in that night with her friends, and even in a crowded room, she was all I saw. We hit it off, and within 2 months, she moved in with me. Life moved fast. 2 years later, we were married, and for the next few decades, we lived like any couple does. Jobs, bills, raising our 2 kids. We had our ups and downs, but I always thought we were solid. Turns out I was wrong. We built a small business together, ran it side by side. When I got hurt on the job and ended up behind a desk, I lost myself a bit. Put on weight, health got rough, and my confidence dropped. Sarah stayed by my side through it all, which I thought was proof of the strength of our bond. But last year, I decided to change for both of us. 2 years, 80 kilos down, and a fresh start. I felt like I was finally getting back to being me. It changed things for us too. Our love life reignited in ways I never thought possible after so long together. I'd catch her looking at me, and she'd say she was proud of me. I had no reason to think she'd ever look for something or someone else. So when she told me she was going away with her sisters on a little getaway, I thought, why not? She deserved it. She worked hard, we both did, and time apart could only make the heart grow fonder, right? I didn't realize it'd be the beginning of the end. 3 days into her trip, I was driving home from work, the same old routine, when my phone rang. It was Sarah. I could tell right away something was wrong. She sounded panicked, her voice shaking like she was about to crack. "Nick, I need to tell you something," she said. And those words hit me like a gut punch. Never thought I'd hear what she said next. "I messed up, Nick. I was with another man last night." I pulled over, gripping the steering wheel so hard I thought it'd snap. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. She kept talking, sobbing, saying she was sorry, that she didn't know what came over her. I barely heard her. My head was spinning as she went on about some stranger at the hotel bar, drinks flowing, and before she knew it, she'd gone up to his room. Her sisters didn't know she'd stayed behind. She said she'd woken up in his bed, sick with guilt, and couldn't face herself. She swore it was a mistake. But it didn't feel like a mistake to me. No, it felt like a choice. Her choice to shatter everything we'd built. I don't know how long I sat in that car, just staring out the windshield, trying to process it. Everything I thought I knew about us, about her, gone in one night. And yet, a part of me couldn't help but listen to her sobbing over the phone, begging me to understand, to forgive. But how do you forgive something like that? She kept saying she didn't know why it happened, that she still loved me and that she'd do anything to fix this. But how can you fix what you've broken? The trust, the loyalty. Once it's gone, it's gone. I told her I needed time. Hung up the phone without waiting for her to reply. Drove home, parked, and just sat there in silence, like a ghost in my own life. The first night after Sarah's confession, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, replaying her words over and over, each one like a hammer blow. The woman I'd trusted with my life, the woman who'd been by my side through everything, had thrown it all away in one drunken night. Part of me wanted to throw things, break something, anything to make the pain stop. But instead, I just sat there, numb, staring into the darkness, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do now. The next morning, I called my kids. They could tell right away something was off. My daughter even asked if everything was okay. I didn't give them details, just said I needed some space, needed time to figure things out. They didn't push, thank God, because I was barely holding it together as it was. My daughter said she'd keep an eye on things at the house, just in case, and I promised to check in soon. But I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. Not yet. Then came the messages. Dozens of them. I turned my phone off after talking to the kids, and when I finally turned it back on, Sarah's texts flooded in. Apologies, explanations, promises, all blurring together. I couldn't read them. I didn't want to. Each one felt like salt in an open wound, so I shut my phone off again. Needed space, needed to clear my head. 2 days passed before I felt ready to face her again. I'd left a note on the kitchen counter, telling her to go to her mother's. I didn't want her in the house, not after what she'd done. And she did as I asked. Packed her things and left without a word. Maybe she thought it was temporary, that I'd cool off, forgive her. But deep down, I knew something had shifted inside me, something I couldn't just ignore. But I wasn't done. I needed to know the truth, the whole truth, if there even was such a thing. So I called her sister. The story Sarah had given me felt off, like she'd left parts out. And when I spoke to her sister, my gut feeling was right. Sarah hadn't just gotten drunk and made a mistake. She'd planned it. The guy she'd been with, he wasn't a stranger. They'd been talking for months, just business, she told her sister. But that night, it had turned into something more. Her sister said Sarah had even mentioned meeting up with this guy, and they talked about it like some twisted little fantasy they both shared. And as her sister told me this, I felt something inside me shatter. The mistake she'd confessed to was a lie. This wasn't just some moment of weakness. It was something she'd thought about, planned for, and followed through on. All those years, all those memories, and she'd destroyed it all. For what? A thrill? A fantasy? I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I took some time to process it all. I didn't eat, didn't sleep. I just sat there, alone in the house we'd made together, thinking about every moment we'd shared, every little sign I might have missed, every time she'd seemed distant or distracted. How could I have been so blind? The next day, I finally texted her, told her we needed to talk. She was at the house in under an hour, looking like hell, eyes red, hair a mess, like she hadn't slept in days. She tried to hug me the moment she walked in, but I put my hand up, told her to sit down. This wasn't some quick apology session. I wanted answers, and she was going to give them to me. She started with the same story she'd given before, saying it was a mistake, that she'd been drunk, that she still loved me and would do anything to fix things. I listened, barely holding back my anger, and then I told her I'd spoken to her sister. Her face went pale. She stammered, tried to explain, but I cut her off. I told her I knew about the months of chatting, the build-up, the planning. This wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment thing, and she knew it. For the first time, I saw something other than regret in her eyes. She was scared. I think she realized that there was no talking her way out of this. And so, finally, she started telling the truth. She admitted that she'd been feeling, unfulfilled. Said she felt like she'd lost a part of herself somewhere along the way, like she wasn't the attractive one anymore, that she'd needed to feel wanted. She said she'd only met the guy for drinks, that things just escalated from there. She swore it was only once, that it was over, and she'd never even thought about leaving me. But what she didn't realize was that I didn't care about the details anymore. The truth was out, and it was like a poison, seeping into every memory we'd shared, every laugh, every kiss. I told her as much, and she broke down, begging me to give her another chance. But it was like looking at a stranger, someone I didn't recognize, someone who'd worn my wife's face but was nothing like the woman I'd loved. I couldn't stay in that house with her anymore. I grabbed a bag, threw in some clothes, and walked out. Didn't look back. Didn't say goodbye. Just left. I checked into a motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions, and I just existed. Didn't know what to do with myself. I'd stare at the ceiling for hours, replaying everything Sarah had said, everything she'd done. One minute I'd be numb. The next, rage would hit me like a freight train. How could she do this to us? To our family? Days blurred together. My phone buzzed constantly, but I ignored it. Calls from Sarah, from the kids, even a couple of messages from her sisters asking if I was all right. They had no idea what to say, and honestly, neither did I. All I could do was sit there, drowning in anger and betrayal, feeling like my entire life had just been ripped out from under me. On the 5th day, I finally picked up my phone. My son had texted, asking to meet. He'd always been close to his mom, but we had a solid bond too, and I couldn't keep him in the dark forever. So I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop nearby, where at least we wouldn't have to sit in silence. When I saw him walk in, I could tell he knew something was up. He looked worried, like he was bracing for bad news. "Dad," he said, sitting down across from me. "What's going on?" "Mom's been calling me nonstop. Says you won't answer her." I took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "Your mom. She cheated." I finally managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't think we can fix this." His face went pale, his mouth opening slightly in shock. He'd always looked up to us, to the life we'd built, and here I was shattering that image. Are you sure?" he asked, like he couldn't believe it either. "Yeah," she admitted it, and it wasn't just a mistake. She planned it, met this guy, knew exactly what she was doing. I replied, my voice harder now, anger seeping through. He sat there, stunned, and I could see him grappling with it, just like I had. I knew this would change how he saw her, and as much as it hurt me, it felt necessary. He deserved to know the truth. We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts, until finally he spoke up. What are you going to do?" he asked, looking at me with that same determination I'd seen 100 times before. "I don't know yet," I admitted, though in my heart, I knew leaving was the only real option. Staying would mean pretending, putting on a show for the sake of what? Stability? The kids? No, I couldn't live a lie, not after what she'd done. He nodded, like he understood, and we parted ways, each of us more broken than we'd been that morning. Over the next few days, Sarah kept calling, leaving desperate messages, saying she couldn't imagine her life without me, that she'd do anything to fix this. She texted 2 long, rambling messages about how much she loved me, how much she regretted it. But all I could think was that she'd had months to regret it, and yet she'd gone through with it anyway. Her regret only showed up when she got caught. Finally, I agreed to meet her, if only to get some kind of closure. We met at the house, her face pale and puffy from crying. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, but at that point I didn't care. I was beyond sympathy. I wanted answers, the truth, even if it hurt to hear it. We sat at the kitchen table, the silence thick and uncomfortable. She started to speak, her voice trembling, telling me how much she loved me, how she never wanted this to happen. She kept saying it was a mistake, a moment of weakness. But I couldn't hold back anymore. "Sarah, stop. Just stop." I interrupted. "You can call it a mistake all you want, but that doesn't change what you did. You didn't trip and fall into his bed. You made a choice that destroyed everything we had." She flinched, her face twisting in pain, but I was past the point of softening the blow. "You've been telling me for days that it was just one time, that you'd never do it again, that you love me, but you didn't love me enough to stop yourself. So what's left, Sarah? What are we even fighting for here?" She started crying again, her hands trembling as she wiped her eyes. "Nick, please. I know I messed up. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if I have to. I can't imagine my life without you, without our family. Please, just give me a chance." I shook my head, feeling that familiar ache in my chest. A chance for what, Sarah? To pretend like none of this ever happened? To lie to each other every day? I can't live like that. I can't look at you and not remember what you did, how you tore us apart. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, unable to even touch her. Her face fell, and I could see the realization dawning in her eyes, the understanding that maybe, just maybe, this really was the end. "I'm leaving, Sarah," I said, my voice steady, final. "You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." For the first time, she didn't argue, didn't beg. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face, as I got up and walked out of the house we'd built together. As I reached the door, I heard her whisper, "I'm sorry." But by then, it was too late. After that, I filed for divorce. She tried to reach out a few more times, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I'd already said everything I needed to. I wish I could say the divorce went smoothly, but nothing about ending a 33-year marriage is easy. The first few weeks after I filed, I felt like a ghost going through the motions without really living. Friends and family tried to reach out, but most of the time I ignored them. What could I say? That everything I'd built my life around had crumbled in one night? Sarah didn't make it easy either. She kept texting, asking for another chance, wanting to talk things over, like we hadn't already said everything 1,000 times. Every time I'd open my phone and see her name, that wave of anger and pain would hit me all over again. Eventually, I blocked her number, told her to go through my lawyer if she needed to contact me. It was brutal, but I needed distance. I needed to breathe. For a while, I felt like I was just existing, not really living. Mornings were the worst. I'd wake up, reach over to the empty side of the bed, and remember all over again that I was alone. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. How did I not see it coming? Was there some sign I'd missed? Some moment when I could have stopped all of this from happening? I'd go over every detail of our life together, every word, every look, trying to figure out where it all went off track. Eventually, I got tired of asking myself those questions. There was no point in dwelling on the past, no way to change what had happened. So I forced myself to move forward one day at a time. I threw myself into work, spent more time with my kids and grandkids, and tried to rebuild some kind of normalcy. It was hard, but little by little, the days got easier. One day, about a month after I'd left, I was having lunch with my daughter, Emma. She'd been my rock through all of this, checking in on me, making sure I wasn't drowning in my own thoughts. As we sat there, she looked at me with this sad, knowing smile and said, "Dad, you don't have to go through this alone, you know?" I tried to brush it off, said I was fine, but she wouldn't let it go. "Look, I know you're hurt, and I know it's going to take time, but you have people who care about you. We're here for you, even if it doesn't feel like it right now." I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat. I hadn't let myself really feel the weight of it all in front of anyone else. I'd been keeping it bottled up, thinking that somehow I could handle it all on my own. But sitting there with her, hearing her say those words, it hit me. I didn't have to carry it alone. For the first time since that night, I let myself feel the grief, the loss, and the hurt. It was like a dam breaking, and once the flood started, I couldn't stop it. After that, I started opening up more, letting my family in. It didn't make the pain go away, but it helped. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I still had people who loved me, who wanted to see me heal. And slowly, painfully, I began to put the pieces back together. One evening, I was at home, sorting through some old photos. There were pictures of Sarah and me, smiling, happy, back when we were young and in love. Looking at those faces, it felt like a different lifetime. I wanted to hate her for what she'd done, but part of me still missed the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. It was confusing. How could I miss someone who'd hurt me so deeply? Then it hit me. I didn't miss her. Not the woman she'd become. I missed the life we'd built, the memories, the love that had been real for so long. And as painful as it was, I realized I had to let go of that too. Holding on to the past, to what could have been, was only going to keep me trapped in this cycle of pain. I had to let it go, for my own sake. So I started the hard work of moving on. I focused on the present, on rebuilding my life one step at a time. I got back into old hobbies, met up with friends I hadn't seen in years, and even went to a few family gatherings without feeling like I was just a shadow of myself. It wasn't easy. Some days the pain would come rushing back, and I'd have to remind myself all over again that it was okay to feel it, that healing wasn't a straight line. Months passed, and gradually, I felt more like myself. Not the same person I'd been before, but someone stronger, someone who'd survived one of the hardest things life could throw at him. I knew I still had a long way to go, but for the first time, I felt like I could see a future, a life beyond the pain. Then, out of nowhere, Sarah reached out to me again. I got a letter in the mail, her handwriting on the envelope. I hesitated, part of me wanting to throw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it and started reading. In the letter, she poured her heart out, talking about how much she missed me, how she regretted everything she'd done. She wrote about how empty her life felt without me, how much she wished she could turn back time and undo the damage. She said she understood if I couldn't forgive her, but she wanted me to know that she still loved me, that she always would. I read the letter 3 times, each word stirring up old feelings, old wounds. Part of me wanted to believe her, to take her back and try to rebuild what we'd lost. But I knew it wouldn't be the same. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. Even if I could forgive her, we'd never get back to what we had before. That part of our lives was over. I put the letter back in the envelope, set it aside, and sat there, staring at the wall. I realized then that I'd already made my choice, even if it had taken me a long time to admit it. I'd chosen to move on, to build a new life without her. And no letter, no apology could change that. It was a strange kind of peace, knowing I'd closed that chapter for good. I still had my memories, the good and the bad, but they didn't hold me back anymore. They were just a part of my story, a story I was ready to move past. The day after reading Sarah's letter, I woke up feeling lighter, like a weight had finally been lifted. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the urge to check my phone, didn't feel like I was waiting for something. I'd made my peace with it. I knew that moving forward wouldn't be easy, but I felt ready. About a week later, I ran into an old friend, Mike, at the grocery store. We hadn't talked much over the years, but he'd heard about what had happened. "Nick, man, it's been a while. I heard about you and Sarah. I'm sorry to hear, buddy," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. We ended up grabbing coffee, and for the first time, I opened up about the whole mess to someone outside the family. Mike listened, nodding along, and then he said something that stuck with me. "You know, Nick, life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Maybe this is just the start of something new, something better." I hadn't thought about it that way. Up until then, I'd only seen this as the end of my life as I knew it. But maybe he was right. Maybe this could be a beginning. I started trying new things, small steps at first. Signed up for a gym, started working out a few mornings a week. Picked up an old hobby, fishing, which I hadn't done in years. I even started going out with a group of guys from work. Felt good to laugh again, to feel like I was part of something. One Saturday, the guys convinced me to join them for a day hike in the hills just outside town. I hadn't been much of an outdoorsy guy since my military days, but it was a good distraction. The air was crisp, the sun shining through the trees, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. As we reached the top of the hill, I took a deep breath, looking out over the landscape, and I felt this sense of freedom. I wasn't Nick, the husband who'd been cheated on. I was just Nick. I didn't have to carry the pain or the betrayal anymore. It was a small moment, but it was like a weight lifting, a feeling that maybe I was more than the scars I'd been carrying. A few days after that, Emma invited me to a small get-together with some friends of hers. I was hesitant at first, felt like I'd be the odd one out, the single dad crashing the party. But she insisted, and I went. Turned out to be a good decision. The evening was relaxed, filled with laughter, and no one asked awkward questions about Sarah or the divorce. It was just normal. That's where I met Claire. She was one of Emma's friends from college, and we started talking by chance. She was kind, easy to talk to, and had a way of making me feel like I wasn't a broken man trying to piece his life back together. We spent most of the evening chatting, laughing about old stories and talking about everything from movies to travel. Felt natural, like I'd known her for years. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about her. But it wasn't like I was rushing into anything. I'd learned the hard way about the dangers of moving too fast. I took it slow, texting her occasionally, meeting for coffee here and there. She didn't pry into my past, didn't ask for details. She just listened, laughed at my bad jokes, and seemed genuinely interested in who I was. It was refreshing, a new kind of connection, one without the weight of all the pain I'd been carrying. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could find happiness again. One night, as Claire and I were walking through the park after dinner, she looked at me with a soft smile and said, "You know, Nick, I don't know what you've been through, but I can tell you're a good man. You deserve to be happy. I felt a lump in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. No one had said that to me in a long time. I realized then that maybe Mike had been right all along. Maybe this was the start of something new, something better than what I'd left behind. Over the next few months, Claire and I grew closer. It wasn't perfect. We both had our baggage, our fears, but we were honest with each other. I told her about Sarah, about the pain, the betrayal, everything. She didn't judge or pity me. She just listened, held my hand, and reminded me that I didn't have to be defined by my past. Eventually, we introduced each other to our families. Emma and my son took to Claire immediately, welcoming her into our lives with open arms. Sarah's betrayal had torn apart the life I'd known, but in its place, I was building something new. Claire became a part of that life, not as a replacement, but as something different, something real. I'd never forget Sarah or the years we'd spent together. She'd always be a part of my story. But I'd come to realize that the end of one chapter didn't mean the end of my whole story. It was just the beginning of something I hadn't planned for. A new life that I was ready to embrace. Claire and I eventually found our rhythm, our own version of happiness. I knew I'd never have the same life I'd once dreamed of, but maybe that was okay. Maybe this was the life I was meant to have all along.